The chainsaw was invented for childbirth, not for cutting trees, not for logging, for cutting through the pelvic bones of women in obstructed labor. The year was 1780. The place was Scotland, and two doctors, John Aitken and James Jeffray, created a flexible chainsaw to solve a problem that was killing thousands of mothers every year. Everything you've been told about the chainsaw is wrong. And look, it makes sense why you'd think chainsaws were always about lumber. Every image in your head, the lumberjack, the horror movie villain, the Home Depot aisle, codes the chainsaw as industrial, masculine, brutal, a tool for conquering trees, not saving lives. But the chainsaw wasn't born in a forest. It was born in a surgical theater. And the story of how it got from the operating table to the logging camp is stranger than anything in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. To understand why anyone would invent a chainsaw for childbirth, you need to understand the nightmare of 18th century obstetrics. The 1700s, Europe is urbanizing fast. Families are leaving farms and crowding into cities. London, Edinburgh, Paris. Sunlight disappears behind smog and tenement buildings. And with it, something else disappears. Vitamin D. Rickets, a bone disease caused by vitamin D and calcium deficiency. In children, rickets softens and warps the skeleton. For boys, this meant lifelong disability. For girls, it meant something worse. When a girl with rickets grew into a woman, her pelvis, the ring of bone through which babies must pass, instead of a round opening, the pelvic inlet became an hourglass, a figure 8, sometimes nearly closed. And when that woman went into labor, the baby couldn't pass through. This is called obstructed labor. And in the 1780s, it was a death sentence. So what were the options? Option 1, the Caesarean section, cutting through the abdomen and uterus to remove the baby. Sounds reasonable, right? Except the mortality rate for the mother was 85 to 100%. No antibiotics, no blood transfusions, no way to suture the uterus properly. Women died of hemorrhage or infection within days. The Caesarean was a death sentence with extra steps. Option 2, the craniotomy, the surgical destruction of the living fetus's skull. A surgeon would perforate the baby's head while still in the womb, collapse the skull, and extract it piece by piece, saving the mother's life by sacrificing the child. This was standard practice. The grim logic of 18th century medicine, a childless mother was better than a motherless child. But then, in 1777, a French physician named Jean-René Segault tried something different. He performed a symphysiotomy. The human pelvis isn't a solid ring. It's two hip bones joined at the front by a piece of cartilage called the pubic symphysis. Segault's idea: cut that joint, let the bones spring apart, widen the birth canal by 2, maybe 2.5 centimeters, just enough for the baby's head to pass. It worked. Both mother and child survived. The medical world lost its mind. Suddenly, there was a third option, a procedure that could save both lives, except there was a problem. Cutting the symphysis pubis with a straight surgical knife was brutally difficult. First, there was no room to maneuver. The baby's head was already jammed against the pelvic bone. A straight blade needed space that didn't exist. Second, a slip of the knife could sever the urethra or bladder, causing lifelong incontinence or fatal infection. Third, the procedure was performed without anesthesia. The patient was fully conscious, held down by assistants, while a surgeon sawed through cartilage and bone. And fourth, here's the kicker: sometimes the joint wasn't cartilage at all. In older women or those with severe rickets, the symphysis ossified. It fused into solid bone, and a knife couldn't cut through bone. You needed a saw. But a rigid carpenter's saw couldn't fit into the curved, narrow space behind the pubic bone without shredding the vaginal wall, the urethra, the bladder. You needed something flexible, something that could thread around the bone, cutting from the inside out, sparing the soft tissue. You needed a chainsaw. 1785. Edinburgh, Scotland. John Aitken, Fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, lecturer on midwifery, publishes Principles of Midwifery, or Puerperal Medicine. In it, he describes a new instrument, the flexible saw, a coil of silver links like a watch chain with tiny serrated teeth on one edge, teardrop-shaped ivory handles at each end. Here's how it worked. The surgeon would unscrew one of the handles and replace it with a long, blunt needle. He'd lubricate the chain, oil, lard, whatever was available, and thread the needle behind the pubic bone, through the narrow space between bone and soft tissue. The needle guided the chain into position, protecting the bladder and urethra from the cutting teeth. Once the chain was threaded through, the surgeon removed the needle and reattached the handle. Now the chain encircled the pelvic joint, teeth facing inward, biting into cartilage or bone. The surgeon gripped both handles, pulled his left hand back, then his right. Scrape, scrape. The sound was distinctive, not the roar of a motor, a wet, grinding rasp, metal chewing through gristle and calcified bone. The patient's agony was absolute. 4 assistants held her pelvis steady against the sawing motion. Blood pooled on the sheets, and then, crack. The dull sound of a green stick breaking. The symphysis gave way. The bones sprang apart. The passage widened. The surgeon withdrew the bloody chain, reached for the forceps. Minutes later, an infant was delivered. The mother was maimed. Months of recovery ahead. Likely a lifetime of walking difficulties, maybe incontinence. But she was alive. Her child was alive. The chainsaw had done its work. Now, around the same time in Glasgow, another Scottish doctor named James Jeffray was working on the same problem. Jeffray claimed he'd invented the flexible saw independently, and maybe he did. Parallel innovation happens, but Jeffray wasn't using it for childbirth. He was using it for amputations, specifically excision of diseased joints. At the time, if a patient had a tubercular knee or a compound fractured elbow, the standard treatment was full limb amputation. Jeffray believed you could save the limb by cutting away only the diseased ends of the bone. But a straight saw couldn't do that without destroying the surrounding muscles, nerves, and blood vessels. To do that with the common saw was next to impossible. A saw, therefore, was prepared of a different kind, to rasp the bone across without hurting the flesh. A saw made of a chain that could flex around bone, that could cut deep inside a wound without lacerating tissue. Jeffray's world, by the way, was as gothic as it sounds. As a professor of anatomy at the University of Glasgow, he relied on resurrectionists, body snatchers, to supply cadavers for dissection. In 1813, a mob smashed his windows, accusing him of stealing a body from a local graveyard. He also conducted galvanic experiments on the corpse of an executed murderer, attempting to reanimate the body with electricity. The chainsaw was born in an era of grave robbing and Frankenstein-level experimentation. But here's where it gets interesting. The flexible saw, Aitken's version, Jeffray's version, was a reciprocating tool. You pulled it back and forth like dental floss cutting through bone. The chainsaw, as we know it, the endless loop of teeth rotating around a guide bar, didn't exist yet. That innovation came in 1830 from a German physician and instrument maker named Bernhard Heine. Heine called it the osteotome, literally bone cutter. And when you see a picture of the osteotome, your jaw drops, because it looks exactly like a modern chainsaw, a loop of linked chain with angled cutting teeth, a grooved steel guide bar to hold the chain in place, a hand crank connected to a sprocket wheel that drove the chain around the bar, adjustable guards to control the depth of cut. It's a chainsaw, unmistakably, just hand cranked instead of motorized. Heine used it for craniotomies, cutting precise geometric shapes into the skull, for bone excisions, for any surgical procedure that required cutting bone without splintering it or damaging surrounding tissue. The osteotome was faster, cleaner, and more precise than anything that came before. It allowed surgeons to cut bone the way a carpenter cuts wood, with control, with geometry, with preservation of the material around the cut. In 1835, the French Academy of Sciences awarded Heine the Monthyon Prize. The osteotomy was manufactured by the best surgical instrument makers in Europe and America. For decades, the chainsaw in this form, under this name, was a prestigious medical device. And then, it wasn't. By the 1890s, two things happened. First, an Italian obstetrician named Leonardo Gigli invented a simpler alternative, a twisted wire saw with loop handles. Cheaper, easier to sterilize, just as effective. The Gigli saw replaced the complex link chainsaws for most bone-cutting procedures. You can still find Gigli saws in neurosurgery suites today. Second, medicine advanced. Anesthesia became standard. Antiseptic surgery techniques reduced infection. Caesarean sections became survivable. The medical chainsaw became obsolete. But the mechanism didn't die. It migrated. 1905, San Francisco. An inventor named Samuel J. Benz files U.S. patent number 780476 for an endless chainsaw. The patent application explicitly states the problem he's trying to solve. Guide frames are liable to lack the stiffness requisite for doing effective work, especially when that work is of a heavy character, as for instance with the huge redwood timber of the Pacific coast. Benz was trying to cut down California redwoods, trees so massive that standard logging equipment couldn't handle them. His solution: take the osteotomy's mechanism, the endless chain, the guide bar, the sprocket drive, and scale it up. Replace the hand crank with a motor. The medical chainsaw became the industrial chainsaw. Over the next few decades, the technology exploded. In 1926, Andreas Stihl patented an electric chainsaw. In 1929, a gasoline version. Early models weighed over 100 pounds and required 2 men to operate. By World War II, aluminum alloys and compact engines made single-operator chainsaws possible. The origin story was forgotten. The chainsaw became what you know today: a logging tool, a horror movie weapon, a symbol of industrial power. But the DNA is still there. The endless chain, the guide bar, the rotating teeth cutting through material too tough for a straight blade. It's the same machine, just pointed at a different target. So the next time you see a chainsaw at Home Depot, in a Wes Craven film, cutting down a tree in your neighbor's yard, remember this: that tool was invented in a candlelit operating theater in the 1780s in Scotland. It was designed to cut through a woman's pelvic bone during obstructed labor. It was wielded by a surgeon trying to save a mother and child when every other option meant death. The chainsaw wasn't born in a forest. It was born in a moment of desperation. A tool designed not for destruction, but for salvation. The roar you hear when it starts? That's the ghost of an 18th century surgical theater. The teeth cutting through wood? They were made to cut through bone. The chainsaw was invented for childbirth, and now you'll never see it the same way again.